Vanlalhruaii, author, Vanlalhruai's short fiction titled Revolution Shuffle depicts a gruesome future of the US, a zombie apocalyptic world. 70% of the American population, most of whom are white, turned zombies by an epidemic that hit the US. In search of a villain or an origin for nameless evil that afflicted people, the US government classified the epidemic as a terrorist act without evidence, without even an idea of what caused it. Fai says that God was not a viable culprit because most of the infected people were white. Therefore, the initially identified enemies were China, North Korea, and the Middle East. Eventually, the surviving Americans of Asian and Arab descent were selected and sent to the labor camps. In addition, Pacific Islanders, Native Americans, Chicanos, and Black people were also sent to the labor camps. One of the many things I found interesting about this short story is the reason Pacific Islanders, Native Americans, Chicanos, and Black people were sent to the labor camps. It was because they protested, dared to raise their voices in opposition, and chose the wrong side. Despite the horrendous consequence of choosing the wrong side, their moral choice signals the desire for different ways of interbeing and relating to others in their collective struggle against social condition that forces people in precarity. In Fai's zombie apocalypse, Pacific Islanders, Native Americans, Chicanos, and Black people stood in solidarity with the Asian and Asian Americans who were designated as the villain instead of siding with the dominant power or maintaining silence. Fai's story is a social commentary on the existing social conditions and a story of resistance that compels us to ask what it would mean for Christians to choose the wrong side as a way of standing in solidarity with those who are in precarity in our brutal reality that is not too far-fetched from Fai's zombie apocalypse. Liberation theology provides us with an idea to the question of what it would mean for Christians to choose the wrong side. That is, opting for the poor. The preferential option for the poor as a theological concept was articulated by the Latin American liberation theologian Gustavo Gutierrez in his landmark book, A Theology of Liberation. This liberation theological notion stresses the importance of opting for the poor, which means taking the side of the poor in social struggles. It is not to exclude other people, but to give the poor priority as an act of solidarity. As Gutierrez has noted, giving priority to the poor and other marginalized people is not new. It is also manifested in the Bible through God's unwavering preferential option for the poor and the marginalized. Making a preferential option for the poor is choosing the wrong side. It is wrong from the perspective of the dominant power or so-called winners of history. While powerful, the notion of preferential option for the poor has been critiqued from different perspectives. Among them are feminist liberation theologians who have pointed out that Latin American liberation theology does not include specific recognition of women as constituting the poor when women bear a disproportionate burden of poverty, racial discrimination, domestic intimate violence, environmental devastation, and the disastrous effects of globalized corporate and financial capitalism. For instance, Latin American feminist theologian Iván Guevara expands the notion of the poor and what it means to give priority to poor women. Guevara contends that opting for the poor is not abstract, but historical and particular. She maintains that, quote, faith requires that we learn to identify the poor who are among us and possibly the poor we are, close quote. Guevara provides a more comprehensive understanding of poverty by including the conditions where people are deprived of certain rights and their existence is not recognized by society due to gender, citizenship status, language, and so forth. Such an expanded understanding of poverty resonates with the notion of precarity discussed by Judith Butler. In her book, Notes Toward a Performative Theory of Assembly, Butler maintains that precarity, quote, designates that politically induced condition in which certain populations suffer from failing social and economic network of support more than others and become differentially opposed to injury, violence, and death, close quote. Precarity is the differential distribution of precariousness, and population in precarity that are differentially exposed suffer heightened risk of disease, poverty, starvation, displacement, and vulnerability to violence without adequate protection or redress, close quote. Included in her examples of populations that are differentially exposed to precariousness are the poor, women, queers, homeless, stateless, differently abled, religious minorities, racial minorities, Palestinians in Gaza, and transgender sex workers. They are part of the same population linked by their sudden or protracted subjection to precarity. As Butler argues, precarity is not an identity category, but the rubric that brings these people together by cutting across different categories and its social and economic condition. As Butler maintains, the struggle against and resistance to precarity has to be based on the demand that lives should be treated equally and that they should be equally livable. Then what does it mean to make a preferential option for the people in precarity as a Christian praxis of solidarity? It is to side with the most vulnerable, unprotected by the state, and disadvantaged. In such siding is a collective practice in which self and others are inextricably bound. Those who side with the people in precarity are not to objectify them, but to be in a relationship with them. As Paulo Freire powerfully argued, quote, solidarity is only possible when the other ceases to be an abstract category and their humanity becomes the primary factor in the relationship, close quote. The preferential option for the people in precarity does not exclude the self who is choosing to side with them. Guevara's preferential option for the poor women that entails option for self, for others, and for a new future of justice and love further shows that such an option corresponds to the gospel commandment of love your neighbor as yourself. Guevara asserts that love of self is not distinct from the love of others and that one cannot develop fully without the other. As she argues, love of self and love of others are bound. For Guevara, others include a human group in distress, a group whose human integrity is diminished either by our various societies or by the church. One of the many ways to love self and love others and to see the self in the face of people in precarity is to grieve over the losses of others caused by injustice. It is to see others as those whose lives are grievable because their lives are livable. To love others and love self is to grieve with and for others as you would grieve over your losses. Others' pain becomes our pain, and we grieve others' losses as I would grieve over our losses. In doing so, we open ourselves to be bound by the sufferings experienced by others. A preferential option for the people in precarity as a Christian praxis of solidarity is to count them as human beings whose lives are equally livable. To grieve for and with those whose lives were not considered equally livable in current social, political, and economic conditions is to see them as human beings whose lives equally matter. Grieving in situations of injustice is not to rush away from the past, but keep the past from vanish from the present that continues to deny it. It is to not allow the losses to settle to the bottom of our memory, but to be kept present in our communal memory. Those who grieve remember the violence inflicted on others by exposing the violent world they had lived, in which we also inhabit. The more we can grieve those who are rendered ungrievable by the dominant power, the better we might be prepared to face the violent world where we are also implicated, which requires to make the social condition livable, where our lives are undeniably interconnected. In making the preferential option for the people in precarity, we also choose to side with the God of the precariousness, not with the God of the power, principalities, and privilege. We are the ones who choose such God and side with the God who grieves with us and for us. Thank you.
Yeah, I find that Nami's presentation is very interesting. And in this kind of things which that comes first into my mind is like choosing the wrong side. So we are putting things in a kind of dichotomy dualism. So if you're going to choose the wrong side, that means there is a right side. And also, precarious. Usually, I don't know in other place, but in my place, like in India, people who are living a kind of precarious life indulge with some kind of practices which the society cannot accept it. I suppose like there are people who are drug users and sex workers, and she also mentioned about transgender sex workers. And these people can easily invest it or live with such kind of drugs abuse and alcoholic, and people who live a very straight life, God-fearing life, and good moral life doesn't usually indulge with such kind of thing. And my question is, when it comes to affect our life, like people who are in the wrong side, we call them in the wrong side because their lifestyle and the things they like are not like us. And when they started doing thieving, robbing, stealing, and doing such kind of unwanted things, it is very difficult to choose their side. So in that context, when people who are living with precariousness are started attacking us, attack in the sense like my term might be too rough, like stealing our things, how can we still side with them? That is one of my questions. And the second thing which I have in my mind anytime when it comes to radical theology, radical contextual theologies, if we side with them, as I said before, their life values some of their life values cannot be acceptable for the wider context in the wider society life. Then suppose like, are we going to accept all the evil things which they do? Are we going to justify things which are not acceptable by the society from the word of God? Or we will side with them, at the same time we will also try to change their lifestyle? Those are my questions. And also, when you talk about precarious life, you talk about women and the oppressions which they face. And here I would like to bring about my context. In my context, that is Mizos in Mizoram, we are not facing the oppressions which other women face in India. Suppose like domestic violence is less, and women are somehow in a very good position, like under government, they can be the president, they can hold the highest post, and also in the social life, they can involve in anything and in everything. But when it comes to the church, women face discrimination because women are not given ordination, especially in my church, Presbyterian Church of India. Some other denomination, they gave the ordination. And in this context, how can we go into side with the women? The women, according to the view of the church, especially in my denomination, women are at the wrong side. But who decide? As Shionis said, who decide who are in the wrong side? We women never say that we are in the wrong side. we also say that we are in the right side and we are also called by the church, but then we are denied to give ordination. And I feel that this is the only area which the Mizo women are discriminated. I might be wrong also, maybe some other areas which women are facing oppression and discrimination, but when it comes to the church and when it comes to ordination, things are very different. So what can we do in this context? These are the points which I'd like to talk about, and I like your presentation. Thank you.